everyone. Welcome to the B++ podcast, a podcast where we talk to technology leaders. We talk about interesting technology solutions from around the world that different organizations can implement. Over the last few weeks, we've spoken to a number of very interesting individuals, founders of companies, CEOs from different spaces, from events tech to social media analytics to business matchmaking. And today we are very happy and honored to have a very distinguished guest. We have Lee Smith, who is the CEO of Logit.io, a platform used by engineers around the world to improve how they handle error resolution, data analysis, and of course, team collaboration. And Lee, very happy to have you here on the podcast today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and a lot of our listeners are business people and like decision makers, C-level executives, and of course startup founders. So I myself am not a technology person. I believe that you have a vast technology experience. So maybe for non-techies like us, maybe what's the best way that you would describe your product and how is it solving the problem for organizations?
Sure, thanks. So one of the things from a non-technical point of view is we are trying to reduce risks and problems and improve exposure of your internal infrastructure to your own company. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is a lot of information is held within your company where people don't necessarily realize that they may be exposed to particular breaches. Security is a big one at the moment where everyone has seen what happened with some large organizations where they've had data breaches. But that's only a slither of the platform in the sense of there's a lot of value in the data that you have as a company, and unlocking that data is becoming more important. So using our platform, you can kind of do a lot of analysis on your data to understand what typical e-commerce platform may launch some new software, and if you're not keeping an eye on your software, you might have an increase in failure rates for your checkout, for example, or increased card declines in a particular area of the world, or whatever that might be. But being able to understand that information very quickly and getting alerted into that information very quickly can save you a lot of money in the long run in multiple folds. Your customers continue to be satisfied because they don't encounter errors. Your development teams and your operations team know how to handle and manage problems more effectively and faster, which causes a faster mean time to resolution. So making life a lot easier. So while there's a bit of a journey to get set up with us, a lot of the common stuff, the common technologies, we're no problem with, but we provide a bit of a custom solution where consumers or customers come on board, and we kind of understand what you need as a business. And once we understand what you need as a business, we can then help you get out of the platform and ultimately out of your data what you need. But at the same time, it's a self-service platform. So if you have engineers that like to do what they need to do without speaking to us, they can do that as well. So there's a bit of a hybrid model there. So customers can come on board, understand their data, and really start ensuring that they're making the right decisions based on the information that you already have. You might not just have it in one place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as they say, data is the new oil, or, maybe oil is already, maybe we should say data is the new Bitcoin or something, because
maybe.
So, I mean, that's fascinating, right? I think some of the things that you mentioned there in terms of, not knowing the risks within the organization, that's huge. And, we work with so many organizations and some really large organizations and global organizations. And sometimes I'm just absolutely baffled at how little they know in terms of some of these potential risks. And they aren't doing much about it. So, and also that you mentioned that it can be a bit of a plug and play model, and then also can be a hybrid model. So obviously when organizations want to engage a bit more with you, and then in that case, does your sort of tech team engage with their teams and try to understand what the challenges are on the processes front, on the data front, and then sort of customize the solution? How does that work?
So there's kind of the two models. The first one you touched on, where customers can sign up if they've got an understanding of what they want out the box, they can pretty much get started within about 5 minutes, start sending us some data, and then starting to build out what they need in the platform. We provide a lot of defaults, a lot of, getting started guides, source wizards where they can just come on board, or data integrations where they, let's call it a web server logs. They send the web server logs. It parses it for you already, gives you some structure, some dashboards. And so you get a lot out of the box for free. When it comes to some of the larger organizations that don't necessarily even know what they have, and when they don't, what I mean by what they don't know what they have is they don't necessarily have the expertise of all of the technology that they have. They might have a good understanding of their estate, their installation, their service, all of that good stuff, because that's what they do day to day. What they might not have is necessarily the ability to translate some of the raw data into what we call structured data, because the power of data is when it's in structured format so that you can understand it. So machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of them kind of buzzwords that are going around in the industry at the moment, I would say, well, been around for a while, to be fair. So alerts, increased errors. So when it comes to large organizations, that we work with the tech team to understand, what their problems are, first of all. One of the biggest things, someone gets told, hey, we need some centralized login, or we need something for compliance. We're trying to get some compliance, or we've been told we need this by a consultancy firm that they've brought in.
Right.
Sometimes, depending on the type of organization, it might not be a tech first organization. So they may only have a small tech company, but they've got a large revenue. So tech department, for example, because they're just growing so fast and they don't know. So we can help support them get what they need at the same time, so they don't have to learn the nooks and crannies of kind of log management, server metrics. They don't necessarily want to learn how to do it. They just want to know how to use it. So there's a bit of a hybrid model, and that would be the hybrid model. And sometimes customers fit in the middle. Sometimes they're like, we know what we want to do. We've done this before ourselves. We don't want to do it anymore. We want you to do it. But we still don't want to give it up completely, so we give the ability to be able to have a bit of both, so they can still tinker and play themselves, but they've still got the support of our team.
Right. And so who's your target customer in an organization? Do you work a lot with CTOs? Is it the, business people who are more involved? Do they identify what the problem is, but they don't really quite know what the solution is? Or does it have to be somebody with great technology background to come in and say, okay, this is the problem. We need to get structured data, and, so that we can sort of monetize that data, or at least handle that data or manage that data better. So who is the person who is speaking with you the most?
Typically, it's technology focused kind of leadership, but the spectrum can be quite wide, because the solution is a log management platform. It's an analytical platform. Realistically, that's what it does. So we've seen over the years it change, but traditionally it's been actually kind of developer operations led, who've then gone to their CTO and said, hey, we really need this tool because it's really going to help us do our jobs. And then what's happened is over the last couple of years, C-level organizations have started to understand that this is actually becoming more of a thing. It's not like being led by tech anymore. It's been led by business. And what that means is where, compliance, auditing, regulations that are coming in, GDPR wasn't a big one in Europe. It was just another kind of strengthening, but they were things which brought it more onto the C-level kind of. So there may be directives coming from the board levels and C-levels, but typically we would engage with CTOs, system managers, operation managers, anyone who's got a responsibility around operationally side of the business, but also the technology side of the business is typically where we've engaged, and at different levels of expertise in what they need. So sometimes we'll get someone that doesn't really know the technical implementation, but they know the problem that they need. So we talk about the problem that we solve, and then we engage, and then we make sure that technically it's what they actually want when we get further down the line with their teams.
Right. Okay. And Lee, tell us a bit more about your journey. I mean, as you were mentioning, you've been in the software industry for the last 20 years. So what prompted or what inspired you to get into, to basically start with login.io? What problem did you see, or was it something more personal? What got you to this point?
So I was working consultant for an organization at the time as a kind of software engineer. That's kind of my core background.
Mhm.
And to not bore you with the first 10 years, they were learning the industry and programming
Yeah.
and doing all of that good stuff. But turned into
Mhm.
doing some consultancy and was working with an organization at the time who had a problem. Well, they didn't even know they had a problem, is probably the right way
Right.
to say it. They had lots
Mhm.
of servers, they had lots of logs, but they had zero visibility. If there was a deployment of software, they didn't really know there was a problem. If a server was offline, they might have got a raw alert, but they didn't really anticipate a problem or see that. So we kind of worked on the hosted ELK, so Elasticsearch Log/Kibana, when it was very much, a lot younger than what it is now. It's a bit more of a
Right.
mature product. There's a lot
Yeah.
going on in that space recently, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah.
Um, so we brought it on board, and then it basically installed that software into that organization and thought, well, it wasn't particularly simple to do, but it wasn't necessarily horrifically technical. But you needed to know what you were doing to be able to do it. It's not easy to do. So I thought
Right.
so that's where Logit was kind of founded on the thought of going, there must be other organizations that have this problem. So the goal is to make it simple for someone to be able to get centralized log management metrics out of their solution without them having to do all the work that was needed to be able to get to this point. So that's how it was kind of born. And the typical startup, self-funded, so working weekends, evenings, kind of side project, which then grew into, it grew organically over the years, which grew into then the company that is today. A lot of difficulties along the way. How do you price it? How do you do this, that, and the other? Typically priced it very low at the start because I was an engineer. So then read a lot of stuff around other founders and learned along the way and realized that, you can't build a business selling something for $9 a month or something like that. It doesn't quite work. And companies want a company that is stable, grown,
Mhm.
and when we typically find when a customer signs with us, it's a number of years that they're with us. It's not like weeks or months, it's years. We actually have customers going back 5, 6, 7 years that have been with us for a long time. And that's we're quite proud of that because we end up partnering with these companies. You end up knowing the engineers that are in these companies. And then when they move around, the engineers move around, they actually come and we end up getting installed in their new companies as well because they're so used to the platform. So I've kind of paraphrased 20 years and then paraphrased the last 8 years of Logit, but that's kind of where we are today.
That's a wonderful story. I mean, because I always say no project is a side project, and the fact that what you sort of built while you were still working, and the fact that not only did it turn out to be such a robust product which solved so many problems, the fact that it lasted this long, and the fact that you mentioned that so many companies have been using it. So, congratulations on that. That's absolutely phenomenal. It's so rare, even with all the funding support and everything. In fact, I was talking to another founder a couple of days back, and they had raised so many rounds, and then last week they said, "Well, goodbye, everyone. Thanks for all the trust and faith." And we are, sunsetting our services, and I was really shocked. So
Yeah.
congratulations on doing it all by yourself, and the fact that starting while you were still working. And so you did mention earlier, the challenges, and of course, the decision that you made. And I haven't met many founders who made that decision. I'm one of them, so I can completely relate to that. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on not going after VCs and stuff. And so, what prompted that decision?
I suppose to some degree it was organically growing fast enough that the vision was there that this didn't need someone else's money to grow. Now, don't get me wrong. If we'd taken VC 5, 6 years ago, it could be 10 or 100 times bigger than what it is now. We
Right.
followed some of our competition who've taken funding and they appear on the outside, and so everything's private, so you never really know.
Right.
To be bigger than maybe what they are and who they are, but I would say to some degree as well, there was kind of we wanted to build a company that was going to be around for, well, I wanted to build a company that was going to be around for a long time. My goal
Right.
wasn't to necessarily get rich and do the Silicon
Mm-hmm.
Valley VC model. That's never been our goal.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. The goal was to build a company where people could rely on the company to be there for a long time. I'm not anti VC. I'm not. I also don't have any experience necessarily in raising funds, so that potentially had an impact as well. Where I haven't done the seed rounds, I haven't done the funding, didn't even really know who to contact. In the UK, it was not as prevalent as it is in the US to some degree. It's
Right.
not seen as, in my working theory and my, what I've read around the UK, it's not as seen to be kind of, you invest in these kind of
Mm-hmm.
investment funds like it would be in Silicon Valley and America to some degree. It's set up a bit different. So potentially that was one of the reasons, in the sense of I didn't really know, but I also didn't feel like we needed it. So that's maybe the trade-off. Could we have grown faster? Potentially, but we've grown pretty quickly anyway. Every year's been a growth year in many different ways, not necessarily just revenue, but team size, people. COVID's obviously been one of the impacts, but we've been largely unaffected. It's been good for us. We've gone fully remote as an organization now, but we wouldn't have been able to do that 3 or 4 years ago because we were hiring quite fast and brought people onto the team. But there's many different reasons to talk about not going down the funded route if you can help it. So if you've got the ability to be able to see the numbers, see the growth, and you've got a relatively low churn rate, that's relevant to SaaS companies. But we had a monthly recurring revenue coming in, and it was always growing. Now you lose customers along the way, and I would often say to anyone that's founding a company that be prepared to be on a roller coaster. There's many ups and there's many downs, but I've often said the ups start to get higher and the downs don't get as low. So while they may feel very low, you always try and reflect, where was it 2 or 3 years ago? Do you know what? That felt really bad. This one doesn't feel as bad. And this high is higher than the previous high. And hopefully that happens. And, from what I've heard is I didn't also want to spend a lot of time chasing funding. I've read a lot where people spend 3 to 6 months trying to get funding. We wanted to focus on building a business rather than focus on VC. We've had lots of people get in touch about partnerships. Are you invested? Do you want to get in touch with, venture capital or, even private capital equity firms have been in touch. And we've typically I've always had a conversation, but we typically say we're not at that point yet. We don't need any equity. We're self-financing, funding, growing. So, I don't see that necessarily changing anytime soon. So it's about stability, and then providing one of the other things, providing it twofold for customers. They know there's a stable platform, they can rely on us. They know that, like you said to the previous founder, and that's not their fault necessarily, that it's disappearing the platform, and that can cause an upheaval for companies. And that's actually been one of the things I've had some feedback with some of our customers. They actually quite like the fact that it's profitable, self-financing. For one of them risks alone, because there are some of the customers we spoke to have been burnt in the past for many different reasons, even in their own organizations, but also our staff as well. They know it's stable. They don't have this volatility of, we've got 6 months before we're going to run out of cash necessarily, or that kind of stuff, So yeah, that's been that kind of reason for not going to VC really.
Wonderful. I mean, many very fascinating things that you said there, but three things really strike me. One, like you said, if the platform's growing and if it's profitable, that you don't really necessarily need to raise that fund, right? So, and I think what a lot of founders don't realize is the set of problems that it may bring, that outside capital. And of course, like you said, you're not anti-funding or anything, but it's just the way things happened and the fact that you didn't feel the need. And sometimes, when the right VC comes along and things are going great, then they can be a bit of an addition to what you're
Yes,
already doing.
that's right.
And where we see so many founders who just stop focusing on the product itself, and it's all about we need to raise the next round and the next round and the next round. And which I think, I mean, it's a great lesson for all the listeners and especially all the founders, who sometimes get so enamored by this outside funding. The second thing that you said, which is very interesting, is the ups are a lot higher and the downs are not so low anymore. And I think that's very reassuring for a lot of founders out there, because yes, it is a roller coaster ride. It is, it's not an easy straight journey, and there are a lot of sacrifices involved along the way. And the third thing that you mentioned, which I want to sort of ask a little more about, is you mentioned that how you've gone completely remote. So just a couple of questions regarding that, because building a technology business, a lot of people don't realize that more than sometimes the idea itself is the teams that build on those ideas. So you're based in Manchester, England. How has the journey been? You mentioned that you've gone remote now. So how did you sort of hire? Because that's something that a lot of companies and startups are struggling to deal with. And secondly, how do you make sure that, I know you have, a lot of experience in, agile development and
Yeah.
remote teams personally. So did that help out a bit? And how was the journey from being an on-site team to a remote team?
So I suppose the difficulty, we already had an established team before we needed to go remote. So we had enough experience within the team already. It would have been a lot harder to do if everyone was fully remote from the start. It is harder, and I recognize that challenge would have been more difficult. However, one of the things I would say, even before we even go to the remote part, as when you found something, you have to remember that you aren't the only person that can do something. You have to start to let go of things.
Right.
So whether that's infrastructure, whether that's development, whatever that is, marketing, SEO, all of them things that you are particularly good at. But when I say particularly good at, I mean you kind of, as a founder, you're good at a lot of things, but maybe not a master of them all. That's one of the common phrases. So when it comes to going remote, we were already set up as a company to allow everyone, even though we had an office and central location, to work remotely. So that was always a vision of mine, because I always knew, for example, if a member of staff needed to work from home because they needed to go to a personal appointment, for example, they could, there's no point in them having the day off or working off if they just need to nip out for an hour and they do, and don't need to work that day. So you lose productivity by not being flexible as an employer. But what comes with that is you have to trust your employees to do their job. So when you hire smart people or people that are good at what they do, you don't need to, well, I feel personally that you don't need to watch what they're doing every day, because as long as they're delivering in an agile manner, the sprints, we run sprints, 2-week sprints, the pretty standard kind of software development lifecycle in agile world. But we don't watch people. We have core hours, but we had core hours in the office, so we were very flexible anyway. So the only thing we removed is the need to be in the same location. Now, COVID has forced that, which maybe opened my eyes a little bit earlier to what would have probably been a naturally effective solution in a couple of years. When it comes to hiring new staff, we actually haven't hired anyone new in the COVID world, but I don't see that being a problem, because if you hire the right people, and when you're hiring someone, you have to trust them, yeah? So you have to trust that they're going to do their job. Now, there is going to be people that don't do their job potentially, or don't work out. But in my opinion, that doesn't matter whether you're in the office or not. That you will find that out eventually. And that's the risk of actually hiring. It doesn't matter where you are. The other benefit of being fully remote is we are no longer located to be in a 50-mile radius of here. We open ourselves up to a talent pool of the United Kingdom, but also further afield, which gives us different metrics. America, East, yourselves, and Singapore, and the different challenges. And we already had everything set up remotely. So the classic example, we use the tools, our management tools, to be able to manage the agile sprints already in place. So realistically, to answer your question about going remote, it's actually been really quite nice, because what we've also found is our members of staff who are maybe living in areas for jobs are now moving to kind of closer to family, potentially, because they no longer have to be within 30 miles of a city centre anymore.
Right.
So their work-life balances, some of our staff have got a dog, for example, and they would never have got a dog because they had to go into the workplace. So very subtle things. And obviously there's a cost saving for everyone. They don't have to commute. They don't have to spend an hour each way. So 2 hours, which is 10 hours a week, which is a working day. They don't have to commute anymore. So there are many benefits outside of that. And the core thing about any business is the staff. While our platform is largely automated and can run itself and doesn't need many engineers to support it, it's always built with automation in mind. It still needs its staff to be able to innovate and develop the platform. So
Right.
just to be clear, our platform is a SaaS platform that doesn't really need engineer input day to day as such. It runs itself,
Right.
but it still needs engineers to improve the platform. So that's where we're fortunate that was always a goal from the very start, that it shouldn't need someone to do something on a daily basis because of many risks. But that's kind of the reason for the remote setup we're at, because we largely already were. We just didn't really, or I didn't really realize it.
Right. So yeah, I mean, getting a dog is probably the best possible benefit, and probably living in a much larger home away from the city center. Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
and I have a couple of questions, follow-up questions based on what you just said. Well, the first thing that you mentioned, about the sprints and the agile methodology. So one question that I ask a lot of CEOs and founders: what's your favorite project management tool? Because there's an ongoing debate about it forever and ever.
If I was going to be really honest with you, the tool that works for your company or works for you. So
Mm.
um, I wouldn't necessarily say there's an individual tool that makes your life any better or any easier. Particularly, the first tool I would say is you need to trust people to do their job.
Right.
So you take away technology tools, trust
Mm.
people to do their job. Now, obviously, the Zoom, Google Meet, have become pretty fundamental.
Mm.
And then also the ability to chat to each other offline. But a
Mm.
lot of it doesn't matter what tool you use, in my opinion. Use the tool that works for you at the size you're at, which is another one. So if you're a team of 5, team of 10, team of 100, you're going to have different needs.
Mm.
So allowing teams to use the tools that they want to use themselves, you will get more productivity out of it. When it comes to Agile's changed my thought process of it. The stand-ups we still do, we do the sprint retrospectives, but the idea of time boxing to 2 weeks is getting a little bit wary. Things happen when they happen. So when you start to trust people,
Mm.
the idea of going, how long is this going to take? Well, it will take as long as it needs to take for that person to be able to deliver it. So
Mm.
realistically, the idea of we have less meetings, we have less. I'm not a fan of meetings anyway, but less meetings and trying to make sure that everyone is just okay. So realistically, when it comes to Agile, don't worry about the tool. Just make sure it works for you as a team and listen to your team. That's the best
I
tool
mean,
you've got.
that's really insightful. I mean, I always believe that you can get the best possible tool, but if you don't have the right people, nothing's
Yeah.
going to get done in any case. And if you have the really good people, then the tool doesn't matter. Of course, the tool helps, no doubt about
Yeah.
that. But, and especially, the reason I ask this question obviously is the fact that, so many of the, younger developers and everything, they just so worried about the tool, and they're like, oh, in my previous organization, I used to have this tool, and I'm always, wondering. I mean, a change in tool doesn't change anything, right? So, but yeah, I mean, so I think that's a wonderful point that you made there. You also mentioned something about getting people who know better than you, right? I mean, that's what the smart CEOs and the smart founders do. And you did touch upon SEO and marketing. So being a SaaS platform, what has worked for you from a marketing perspective, and what are you looking to do, going forward?
So this is a really interesting one because for years we kind of was very tech focused, and what I mean by tech focused, engineer focused, and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't really have any UI UX, and we didn't have
Mm-hmm.
anyone in the marketing role. So we kind of, for the first 4 or 5 years, didn't hire in that space,
Mm-hmm.
and that would have been, if I look back on it, that was probably a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Not giving marketing or UI UX enough time. And what I mean by that is we've done 95% engineering, 5% or 4% UI UX, and 1% marketing, and just was a little bit lucky along the way. So it was organic. We kind of just grew by the fact that we were working on a hosted ELK platform, so Elasticsearch Log/Kibana. We also grew on the popularity of the tool, and the open source side of it as well, just to be very clear. So when it came apparent that I could no longer ignore, to some degree, marketing, SEO, UI, UX, and they would have been outside of my comfort zones. So what I mean by that is the fact that I was just always engineer-led. So it always felt really easy to go back to doing engineering. I knew it really well. I knew a lot of the problems. Whereas when it comes to marketing, different channels, UI, UX, I've got a good understanding of UX, but I can't, it's well known within the company that I have zero UI skills. I can't make things look very nice. And we have now fortunately hired someone who does a better job of that than me. So, and again, with the marketing and SEO, it really is a full-time role. And we've fortunately brought people into the business that are doing that full-time. So Eleanor, who's also listening in on the call, is doing that full-time. So, giving people that ability to do it is the goal.
Right.
And also, we've replaced largely some of the engineering teams, and the operations side I don't do anywhere near as much as I used to, because I'm now trying to move into the role of letting other people do it, because you reduce the risk. One of the things I'd say to any founder that was there is that if you don't reduce the risk of you not being there, my sole goal is if I'm not there, the company still runs. Because if I'm ever on holiday, it's nice to have a holiday when we're not in COVID, but that's a different problem. But if you're off sick or anything, or any reason you don't feel very well, you've got other people, and that's how you build a company. So carving out the roles that you like to do or don't want to do is really important, but it's really hard to let go. Don't underestimate if you're hiring someone. You just have to let go and understand that they need to learn the role, give them a bit of time. But then once they learn the role, and you give them and you let them, give them a bit of freedom. Don't try and constrain them into what you're doing. So, and that works wonders.
That's a very interesting thing you said. I speak with a lot of founders, and the most common thing that I've discovered is a founder's never happy with his or her replacement, right? In the sense that it's just, you can't stop yourself from jumping right in and say, let's do it this way.
Yeah, that's right. You can still do that, but you have to do it in a way of respectfully that, you've got to remember, so if I said to you 7 or 8 years of running Logit, I know the company inside out. When someone comes new on board, they may not know, they just don't have the same domain knowledge, and that it's impossible to transplant your knowledge into someone else. What you'll find, though, over a year period, when they get a little bit more confident, they understand the business a little bit more, they will start to go, do you know what? And always make sure that they've got the ability to say, no, I think that's a bad idea. What you don't want to do as a founder is be forceful and say, this is it, because then you're just not really replacing that role with something. You've got to allow people to bring their experience and also their thoughts into the role. So, you've got to be scared to let people, not be scared to let people push your boundary a little bit as well. It's very easy to stay in your comfort zone. So by that nature of what you're saying, no one can ever do the job as well as you. I disagree, but the feeling is there, 100%. You've got to override that feeling. Do you know what? Let's have a go.
Absolutely. I think, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's not so much the skill and the ability, but I think the relationship that you build with your company. And then it's like you mentioned a few times, it's very difficult to let go. But the trick is obviously to let the other person be, and, not really come in the way and tell them how to do their job, right? So that's very important. So is there something specific that you see when you're hiring people? Is there, we talk about, attrition rates are very high in the technology industry. There are so many opportunities. There's a serious demand and supply mismatch. Then of course there could be geographical boundaries, not so much in your case anymore, but what do you see in people when you're hiring them? I mean, other than maybe say a code test or, their experience, is there something that, X factor that you look for when you're hiring?
If they're going to kind of, so everyone can learn. So you've got to remember when you hire someone that they may have some skills and skill sets, but they don't necessarily have the skill set exactly what you're looking for. And that's
Mm,
normally the case with most hires. I've hired a lot of people over the years. What you're
mm,
looking for is someone who wants to learn, um, enjoys a bit of freedom at the same time. So you don't want to micromanage. And every company is different. So some people like to be micromanaged and directed, but that's not what we're necessarily looking for. We're looking for people that want to be able to do their job, get on with it, and not feel like they're being watched. It's important. So it really comes down to the individual rather than the skill set. Now, while the skill set matters, I'm not underlying the skill set, employing smart people, but typically you can find enthusiasm, wanting to learn, and the ability to be able to be trusted, which you learn very early on when you hire people if you can trust them long term or not, is probably one of the main factors we would look at when we're hiring people. It's not necessarily their underlying direct skill set. While that obviously is a core foundation, they need to have a core level of feature, but you can learn that on the job to some degree as well. Um, being able to communicate effectively is another one as well. So they would be the
right.
core couple of skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all of them are quite important. The ability to communicate, and like you said, you should be able to trust them. Enthusiasm, which is in shorter supply these days, and the willingness to learn,
Mm,
which is an absolute must in every sector, especially in tech, because things are moving so quickly, and it's important that like you rightly said, we've seen people coming with different technology stacks, and you know we've seen the difference just the attitude makes. Somebody can just simply say, oh, that's too much for me, I don't know this, and they can start complaining about the situation, or they can say, give me a few days and give me a few weeks and let me try and figure this out. And even if they don't succeed, is the attitude, is the energy that rubs off on everyone around them, and that
yeah,
makes
that's
such a
right.
difference. Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah.
does. It
So
makes a big difference.
yeah, great. So the other thing you mentioned a bit about, UI, UX, and now that you're focusing a lot more on that. So does that mean that you're trying to take, Logit.io a bit more mainstream? I mean, if that's the right term, or basically just make it a bit more acceptable or a bit more sort of desirable for people who may not be hardcore engineers or, technology professionals? Or is it just a natural progression in the product's evolution?
A little bit of both. One of the things that we're focused on is to make sure that the tool is easy to use, because it's
Hmm.
such a technical tool, or can be such a technical tool,
Right.
and not always technical people will use it once it's in place. You want to try and make it easy for someone to use and explain. So when I talk about UI, UX, they are the user experience of kind of signing up, for example, and getting started is really important to make sure that users don't get lost. Um,
Right.
and then the UI is also from a marketing point of view of changing the outlook of the company so that it doesn't feel like it's a startup anymore. Because we're not, I suppose to some degree we are a startup in the way we work, but we're not a startup because we've been going for 7 or 8 years, and we don't have as many risks. But every business has risks, I appreciate. But we don't have the immediate risk of we're going to run out of money in 3 months, for example, or the VC risk. It's a different risk set now, is all I would say.
Right.
So stabilizing the platform, maturing the platform, creating some style guides and understanding where, if you're creating a similar page to one that's done before, you don't have to go and do the same design process because it's already been done before. So working a bit smarter is maybe the other way to
Right.
say it as well.
Right.
And then also trying to actually solve the user's problems. So one of the things that a lot of people don't do from very early on is maybe talk. So one of the advices I give to founders is speak to your customers as much as you can. You know, find out what their problems are. If you've got problems in your product or platform, well, everyone has, but more so at the start, you want to know what they are and you prioritize and fixing them. You will get a lot of leeway off your customer base or your people who are trialing it if you said, I will help you. to create the deficiencies in your platform or your software. If you help someone, they understand that nothing's perfect in the software world, but there's nothing more frustrating when you try and ask for some support and it just goes to a dead end and you leave. That's what happens. So that's hard in its own right. So we still do a lot of customer support, speak to customers, find out what their problems are. And sometimes they just don't know that you can solve that problem because your marketing, you haven't brought up to speed, or it's a new feature you've just released. So
Yeah.
sometimes you just need to tell people what the problem is and how to fix it.
Yeah. I mean,
So UI,
yeah.
UX,
Yeah, I mean
go on, sir.
that's a great insight again. The fact that I think the whole idea of continuing to work on the UI UX is also the fact that especially for a technology product, and so it doesn't intimidate people as much sometimes. It's just that I've seen with some new emerging technologies, and there the resistance. The resistance to try it out is sometimes not based on the fact that people don't believe in it, but it's just some sort of a fear. It's just the fact that it seems a bit more intimidating. So I think, yeah, that's definitely something I think will be great in terms of you improving the UI UX constantly. And the second thing uh, that you mentioned there in terms of listening to your customers and speaking to them as much as possible, because that is something that a lot of organizations either just don't do, or they don't do it enough, right? So I was speaking to this CEO, right out of school, raised a few $1 million, built a product. And the first time I remember meeting him, and I said, it's a wonderful product, but it's not a business, it's not a company. And he and I wasn't trying to be
Mm,
discouraging, and I was just trying to tell him, and I said, why don't you speak to your customers and just try to see how you can sort of tweak this to turn it into more of a business. And unfortunately, he and his co-founders did not. And 16 months later, the company didn't exist, right? So again, I think that's a great
yeah.
piece of advice for all the founders listening in. It's important that you always speak to your customers, try to solve their problems, and just see, and sometimes just educating them about the new features that you might have added that's going to help them, like Lee said. So uh, moving on, I mean, other than UI UX, what's ahead for you from a product point of view, and personally for 2021? What is it that you're looking forward to, other than the vaccine, of course?
Yeah. Taking COVID out of this. So, yeah, so we're trying to really make it easy for companies, and we have been striving for years to make Logit a platform where someone can come on board and not need it to be as technically focused. While there's an initial technical setup, and actually, over the years, we've actually found that Logit is being used in different ways as well. It's not just log management. It's not just metrics. Sometimes it comes down to actually managing some of their applications. We found some of our customers are starting to ask to white label Logit. So, they
Right.
want to be able to sell it to their customers internally, or they may be a platform themselves. So there's a little bit of that where I've been speaking to some customers, and they are like, we really like Logit as a platform. We want to be able to kind of resell Logit a little bit, gain partnerships, speak with other larger organizations that, maybe don't know we exist. So one of the goals this year is to try and get more exposure for Logit, because we believe we're a very good company. We solve a very good problem for a lot of organizations. They just don't know we exist. So if there was any challenge that we would have this year, is not a technical challenge this year. It's going to be exposure, really. So trying to increase the exposure. We've tried the Google AdWords and the other things, but I'm not a massive fan of Google AdWords and that kind of stuff. I actually prefer to build relationships with organizations, consultancy firms, to say, look, if you send a consultant in, they can speak to us. And that kind of model really is where we're moving, while also technically evolving the platform to make it even easier for customers to use. So that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, you again touched upon something very interesting, which, I've heard again and again from so many technology leaders about the fact that, Google ads may not be the right way to promote your product. And especially if your product is quite evolved, even search engine optimization may not be the right way, because people are not searching for those problems to be solved because they may not even know these problems exist. So I think, you probably have to take a
That's right.
different approach as a founder. You more exposure, like you mentioned, building a bit of a relationship, public relations, LinkedIn, some of those tools, and yeah, I mean, sounds wonderful. And despite COVID, it seems like Login.io is headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
And what's in store for you? I mean, in terms of personally, where you looking to head out to as soon as borders open up and one doesn't have to quarantine to go from one part of the world to the other? Is there something that you are anxiously waiting for?
Not really, actually, because when I say that is in the sense of um, I actually don't think that'll happen in 2021. Personally, I think it's still going to be a tough year. I think
Mm,
making sure that the main priority for myself this year is making sure all of our staff are okay, everyone's working effectively, everyone's okay, because we're now in the
mm,
UK back in quite a strict lockdown. So making sure that everyone's okay. There's a
mm,
lot of turmoil around the world at the moment. So realistically, it's stabilization. Traveling maybe somewhere a bit warmer than Manchester. It's kind of raining and a cold winter, or cool winter. It's not cold. Depends what part of the world you're in. If you're in Sweden and stuff like that, it's cold, but it's not that cold. But it's quite wet. So
yeah.
maybe somewhere that's a little bit warmer. But again, at the same time, because we're a remote company, we aren't stuck to homes as such. So we do have that benefit. So I probably would say I haven't really had a full holiday for a number of years. But that doesn't mean that I've not been away and disconnected. But at the same time, as a founder, you're in it for the long term, so you don't really necessarily have what I would class as a holiday where you go 2 weeks and do it. But that's not me anyway. So we don't tend to do that. So, but yeah, going back to it, just looking to grow, solidify more relationships, enjoy the fact that we're in an industry that's fairly fortunate. We've not been as impacted as much as COVID as some other industries. So sometimes it takes a time to reflect as a founder, and you sit back and go, do you know what? It could be a lot worse. So maybe that's some advice I'd give to some people listening, that things can be a lot worse than what they actually are. That just helps you go, do you know what? It's not too bad. It might feel really bad, but it's not always that bad.
Well, on that lovely note, I must thank you, Lee Smith, for joining us. That was truly inspiring. Thanks for sharing your insights. Congratulations on all
No
the
problem.
success, and wish you a super successful 2021 and way beyond 2021 as well. Thank you so much.